Mr. Jayaprakash,
हाँ sir.
what is the chapter, what is the title name? You are saying deeming provisions under the income tax or deemed income under the income tax?
Suresh sir is there. Sir, just
No, is it deemed income or deeming provisions?
deeming provisions, sir.
What do you mean by deeming provisions?
That includes deemed income, sir. Suresh sir is there.
No,
Suresh sir.
include deemed income. Even deemed resident also the concept is there. Deemed to be assessed in default concept is there. So you are interested in knowing deemed income or you are interested in knowing deemed provisions. There are so many deemed provisions otherwise. I thought
Right,
you
sir.
talked to me about deemed income.
Correct, sir. Correct. Okay, no problem, sir. Deemed income. I will do one thing, sir.
Deemed provisions, even these days, a new provision of non-resident has become deemed resident also. You know, a new provision.
Yes, sir. That is also required, sir, because that is a
I'll
hot
tell you
topic.
that also.
Okay.
I'll say that in addition to the deemed income, I will come out with one deemed provisions of residential status.
Oh, sure, sir. Sure. Suresh sir.
Yes, sir.
Suresh sir.
Yes. Para
Correct.
JP.
ഒന്ന് elaborate ചെയ്യ് sir.
Okay. Deemed residential status and this deeming provisions relating to income.
It should be deemed income otherwise.
Yes, sir.
We shall start at sharp 7 o'clock, sir.
Yeah, no problem.
Sir, our Kannur senior members are there. Alapi Krishna sir is here. Suresh sir is here. Sir, shall we start, sir?
You can do whatever you like. You can start.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Very good evening to all of you. Most respected faculty of today's virtual CP seminar on deemed provisions under the Income Tax Act, CA Dr. Girish Ahuja sir, Vice Chairman of Kannur Branch CA PJ Riji, Secretary CA Shivaprasad sir, members of the profession, ladies and gentlemen. Today, all we are delighted with the presence of a tax guru, or we could say the tax god of India, CA Dr. Girish Ahuja sir. Sir, I don't know how to express our gratitude and happiness through this virtual platform on this historic moment of Kannur branch. And sir, really, it was my dream or our dream, and now it becomes a reality. And I could not even believe that 2 times I have got a direct call from you, a passionate professional, after contacting this great professional with fear and utmost respect to handle a session on direct tax on behalf of a branch, small branch like Kannur branch of SARC of ICI. Sir, you uplifted the Kannur branch to a different platform through your presence as a faculty, and no person in India or even in the world could hereafter decline the invitation of Kannur branch, because now Kannur branch is going to be a platform where CA Dr. Girish Ahuja presented a paper on direct tax. Sir, I am taking this opportunity to welcome you on this virtual CP seminar on deemed provisions under Income Tax Act, and thanking for accepting our invitation and your great commitment towards the profession of chartered accountancy, sir. Sir, welcome, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
I'm taking this opportunity to welcome all the members of the profession and thanking for your great support to the great branch. Now I could say that great branch, Kannur, and the profession, and requesting to utilize this great professional for the next 2 hours. And regarding our next CP program of this coming 10 days, on Wednesday, 8th July, we will have another CP credit on standards on auditing, an update for 1920 audit by CA Joman K. George. And on 11th July 2020, Saturday, we will have another CP meeting on expectation from scrutiny of GST annual return filed for 2017-18 by CA Jitin Christopher from Bangalore, subject to CP committee approval. On 16th July, there will be another seminar on complaints and deadline under income tax, GST, banking and other business laws by CA Gururaja Acharya from Bangalore. I am requesting all the Kannur branch members to fill the Google form for CP credit requirement. Now I request the Vice Chairman of Kannur branch, CA PJ Raji, to formally introduce our faculty to the participant. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Raji, please.
Respected Chairman C. Jayaprakash, renowned Speaker of the Day, and beloved C.A. Dr. Girish Ahuja ji sir, members of the Managing Committee, past Chairman of Calicut Branch Mani sir, my fellow members in the profession, and dear friends, it's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce before you a great personality, leader of the profession. Sir, I am sure that sir, you need no introduction to the members of the profession. As a matter of professional courtesy, I see Dr. Girish Ahuja ji, holder of degree in commerce from Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi University, holder of master degree in commerce from Sri Ram College of Commerce, Delhi University, completed his chartered accountancy in the year 1970 and was a rank holder both in the intermediate exam and also in the final exam conducted by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Took his doctorate from Faculty of Management Studies, Delhi University in the year 2009. He is presently practicing as a chartered accountant mainly in the field of direct taxes. He was nominated by the Government of India as a member of the task force for redrafting the Income Tax Act and also the new income tax law. Nominated by the Government of India as an independent director to the Central Board of Directors of State Bank of India for 2 terms. Nominated by the government with the approval of the Supreme Court to the Board of Directors of Unitech Limited. Appointed as an independent director of the Board of Ruji Soil Industries Limited. Appointed as independent directors of other 3 limited companies. Nominated member of the High Powered Committee constituted by the Government of India under the chairmanship of Justice A.P. Shah, Chairman Law Commission, to look into the applicability of MAT provisions in case of foreign companies and FIIs, and any other issues relating to applicability of direct tax provisions which may be referred to it by the government and CBDT. He is the author of more than 25 books on direct taxation, both for students and for professionals, including a concise commentary on direct taxes, compendium of issues on income tax and wealth tax, direct taxes ready reckoner, direct tax law and practice, guide to TDS, taxation of capital gains, etc. Delivered more than 3,200 lectures on various topics of direct taxes organized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Institute of Company Secretaries of India, Chambers of Commerce, Management Institutes, and other various organizations. He is a consultant on tax matters to various industries and non-profit making organizations. He is a patron of Tax Law Educare Society, a non-profit making voluntary organization with the main objective to educate general public and professionals on taxation, law and allied matters for the last 10 years. He is the president of SRCC Alumni Association for more than 20 years. With these few words, let me proudly present before you a man with no comparison, a walking encyclopedia on direct taxes, CA Dr. Girish Ahuja ji. Sir, we are eagerly waiting to hear from you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Raji. The chairman of the Kannur branch, CA Jayaprakash ji, and of course, PJ Raji, the chairman, of course, who has read my profile also. Thank you very much for that. Then we have that Mr. Dinesh Kumar. I don't know, co-host is here. Ladies and gentlemen. Well, I'm supposed to talk to you about deemed provisions. Basically, I was supposed to talk to you about deemed income. But whatever is written there is deemed provisions. Now, deemed provisions can be other than income also. Because recently a very important thing has happened in the Finance Act 2020. So I would like to talk to you about that because you belong to Kerala. And there are many people in Kerala who have gone abroad, and particularly the Gulf country. And for them a new law has come for being a resident or a deemed resident. So let me first talk about that, and then I'll talk about the deemed provisions of that income tax. Now let me explain to you. You know, we have section 6, subsection 1 relating to subsection clause 1 is there, relating to an individual is said to be resident in India if he has been in India for a period or period amounting to all 182 days in the relevant previous year. If you are in the previous year here in India for 182 days, you are resident in India. Everyone knows. Then if we are not there for 182 days, we switch over to the second condition. In the 4 preceding previous year, immediately preceding the relevant previous year, we should have been in India for 365 days or more. And in the relevant previous year, just 60 days or more, you are called resident in India. 365 days in the 4 preceding previous year, and in the relevant previous year, 60 days, you are resident in India. But you have an explanation, 2 clauses of that explanation, explanation clause A and clause B. Explanation 1, clause A, clause B. What is explanation clause A saying? In case of a citizen of India who leaves India in any previous year for employment abroad, the period of 60 days in condition number 2 shall be substituted by 182 days. Meaning thereby, if you want to leave this country for employment abroad, employment means job or self-employment abroad, then you can stay in India for 181 days. Even if you are here for 365 days in the 4 preceding previous year, you will still be non-resident in India. The moment you are here for 182 days, you are otherwise resident in India as per clause 1. So therefore, the concession was given to citizens of India who wanted to leave India for employment abroad. You know that many people from Kerala have gone abroad. The year in which they leave for employment abroad, they can stay in India for 181 days. Now coming to the clause B, explanation clause B. Explanation clause B says, in case of a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin who is outside India, who comes to India for a visit, the period of 60 days in condition number 2 shall be substituted by 182 days. What was that? That if you are there in outside India, many of your relatives are outside India. If they want to come and visit India, they could stay here for 181 days without being called resident. Without being called resident. Now some amendment came. I remember I was delivering a lecture on 1st of February in the evening. On webcast was there from Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, Delhi. We always have a webcast on the 1st itself, and I always deliver the lecture. At that particular point of time, we were delivering the lecture on residential status, the amendment in the residential status. We got about 400 calls from Gulf countries. We got call from Dubai, Kuwait, even Muscat, Bahrain. Sir, what have you done? They were asking me, sir, what have you done? I said, I never did anything. Sir, you were making an income tax law. You must have advocated, you must have told them to do that. I said, we have not done this. It was a different story, which we wanted to change, but that point we'll be taking later. But this has been done. Still, I told them, don't worry. You will not have to face any difficulty because you have double taxation treaty with India. And I told them that I am coming for that budget lecture. I went to, I said, I am coming to Dubai. I went to Dubai, I went to Kuwait during that time, went to Qatar. I even went to, of course, Oman. I went there, Muscat. And I delivered the lecture there on budget during that time. It was February. After that, you know, what has happened in COVID. But I came back, of course, by about 16th or 17th, no, 19th of February. That time, there was not a problem. And I told them that you will not have any difficulty because of double taxation treaty, and you will not be put into difficulty. They said, sir, who will take tax residency certificate, and we are going to have a lot of problems. When I came back to India, I straight away got an appointment. I asked for an appointment with the chairman of the CBDT, the wonderful person. I told him I wanted to meet him because of some real problem which has come in this. So then he said, you are most welcome to come. and explained him the whole story, what has happened and what are the people feeling, they are staying in the country outside India, they will be put into a lot of difficulties. He was very kind enough to listen to me. And during the course of government amendment, the whole sequence has been changed. Now, let me tell you what is the new amendment now. Wait. First, I'm taking to the clause B, earlier clause B. What is that clause B is of earlier? I'm not taking about Gulf problem separate. But wait. Clause B says, this we recommended. Clause B says, in case of a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin who is outside India, who comes for a visit to India, the period of 60 days shall be substituted by 181 days, meaning thereby he could come and visit India for 181 days without being called a resident. This I remember started when Savraj Pal was shifted to UK. Savraj Pal is from North. He shifted to UK. Mrs. Gandhi was the Prime Minister at particular time, and she was, Savraj Pal used to treat her as a sister, his sister. He spoke to this, Savraj Pal spoke to Madam Gandhi, look here, that I have shifted to UK, I've become resident of UK, but I would like to come to my country, visit this country here, and do some business here also. But the condition is if I stay here for more than 59 days, means 60 days, and in the 4 preceding previous year, 365 days, I'll become resident. And the moment I become resident, I will have to pay tax on the income which I earn in foreign country also. Although I may get relief for that, but I will have to pay tax on the foreign income also. Sir, this is not done. Then Mrs. Gandhi was very kind enough to raise this 60 days to 90 days for these persons. Later on, 90 days were raised to 150 days. And gradually 150 days were raised to 182 days, which you know the present provision. But this provision is now misused. Many of the people have shifted to a country outside India. And they are saying that India is a polluted country. India is a corrupt country. Although they have taken the money from this country to the foreign country by good means or by foul means. You are taking away the money from this country. Now you say India is a corrupt country. You are doing money laundering business. You have left India and settled abroad by taking your money from India. First the Britisher took. Now you are taking the money from India. Now you are saying the country is a corrupt country, or is a very polluted country. The pollution was done by you, my dear. You had done the pollution. I'm talking about not the people who have gone to Gulf. I'm talking about those who have settled in UK and other places. And they have shifted their base to there. There were 2 reasons. Black Money Act came in 2016. And if you are a resident, an ordinary resident in India, after the Black Money Act, you have to declare the foreign asset in your return of income. You have to declare all the foreign assets, your foreign interest, your beneficial interest in that country. They never wanted to declare that part because they did not declare that amount in the Black Money Act. And since they knew that they will be caught, they left India and settled abroad. Because a non-resident does not have to give the declaration of the foreign assets and foreign beneficial interest. But if you are a resident, an ordinary resident in India, you have to give the complete detail, your return of income of the foreign assets and your foreign interest, and if you have any right of operating an account, you have to give the complete detail. They never wanted to give the detail because all hanky-panky things have been done by them. So they shifted abroad. We said if they have no love for this country, why they should be allowed to come and stay here for 180 days without being called a resident, and they are enjoying the life and not giving all details of the foreign assets. We told them to bring down the slave. Now what they have done, this is not for Gulf people, please. What have they done? Clause B explanation has been extended. I will tell first the old explanation, then I will enlarge this. What is that clause B? In case of a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin who is outside India, comes to India for a visit, the period of 60 days in condition number 2 shall be read as 182 days. No change. No change. And continuation. And in case of a citizen of India or a person of Indian origin who is outside India and whose total income other than the income from foreign source exceeds 15 lakh, he comes to India for a visit. The period of 60 days shall be substituted by 120 days. 120 instead of 182 days. Meaning thereby, if you have total income always means taxable income. Taxable income is after deduction. But wait, this total income other than income from foreign source, you do not have to include income from foreign source in this 15 lakh, but two income from foreign source to be included. One is income from a business outside India, but controlled from India. Second is income from a profession outside India, but set up in India. Take the Indian income plus two foreign income. What are two foreign income? Income of a business outside India, but controlled from India, or income of a profession outside India, which is set up in India. If these two income plus Indian income exceeds 15 lakh, then if you visit India, you can visit for 19 days without being called resident. You will be called non-resident. But the moment you are here for 120 days, you will be called a resident. And the moment you are here for resident, you have to pay tax on your foreign income also. This is the position now. Now this clause be two types. If your total income outside India, if your total income including those two foreign sources income does not exceed 15 lakh, then you can come to India for 181 days, provided you are paying tax in that country. But if it exceeds 15 lakh, you can come to India for only 119 days. The moment you are here for 120 days, you become resident. This is clause B which has been changed. But this is not deemed case. Now I am coming to deemed resident. Now what they have done, they said that there are many people who have settled abroad and they are not paying tax in that foreign country also. Neither they are paying tax in the foreign country, nor on that foreign income, nor they are paying tax in India on that foreign income. Why they should be spared? The people who have settled in Cayman Island. The Cayman Island, there is no tax at all. They are earning lot of income. My money diverted from here, earning lot of income in Cayman Island, but there is no tax in Cayman Island. People have shifted to Bermuda. People have shifted to Bahama. People have shifted. Now, talking about the Gulf. Even in Dubai, there is no tax. In Kuwait, there is no tax. In Muscat, there is no tax. In Oman, there is no tax. In Bahrain, there is no tax. Now, they are also not paying tax. Now, what they have done, although they are not paying tax, but they are non-resident of India, they are paying tax on Indian income. But now they have changed the law. But don't worry. There's not a very difficult situation. Now they have inserted section 6(1)(a). Clause 1(a) under section 6. Listen to me that carefully, that is the deemed provision. Notwithstanding anything contained under section 6(1). What is section 6(1)? That if you are here for 182 days, you are resident. Or in the 4 preceding previous year, 360 days, current year 60 days, or condition, explanation, you are resident. But now he said, don't bother about that, notwithstanding anything in that. In case of a citizen of India who is outside India, whose total income, excluding the income from foreign source, exceeds 15 lakh, he shall be deemed to be resident in India. Please note the word. He shall be deemed to be resident in India if he is not liable to pay tax in the foreign country by reason of his domicile or by reason of his residence or criteria of similar nature. We have followed USA. Anybody who is a citizen of USA or who has green card of USA, he is treated as a deemed resident of USA. Deemed resident means he has to pay tax on global income in USA. He is treated as deemed. Even if you are not USA for one day, but if you are a citizen of USA or you are holding a green card of USA, you become deemed resident and you have to pay tax global income in USA. Similarly now, if you are a citizen of India and you are in a foreign country and you are not liable to pay tax in that foreign country, you don't pay tax in UAE, you don't pay tax in Gulf, you don't pay tax in Kuwait, you don't pay tax in Bahrain, You don't pay tax in Oman. You don't pay tax in Qatar. You don't pay tax. I went there also. Now, since you don't pay tax by reason of your residence or by your domicile or criteria of similar nature, you are not paying tax. But if your total income, that is Indian income plus 2 foreign sources, Indian income plus 2 foreign sources income. What is 2 foreign sources income? Income from a business outside India but controlled from India, or income from a profession outside India but set up in India. After including this, if your total income exceeds 15 lakh, you will be called deemed resident. The moment you exceed 15 lakh, you will be called deemed resident, even if you do not come to India for one day. Even if you don't come to India for one single day, still you are deemed resident. A very, very big thing. And once you are a resident, you have to pay tax on your foreign country. But don't worry. Wait and watch. You are called deemed resident. So all those people who are in UAE, all this, your Keralite, who are in UAE, who are in Kuwait, who are in Bahrain, who are in Qatar, or who are in other country where there is no tax. And if they have total income in India, plus income from foreign source, taxable income, plus income for 2 foreign source business outside India, controlled from India, professional outside India setup, then if it exceeds 15 lakh, you will be considered as deemed to be resident. But wait. Let me tell you, resident are of 2 types. Ordinary resident, not ordinary resident. And then you are either resident or non-resident. If you are non-resident of India, you know that you only have to pay tax on Indian income. You do not pay tax on income which accrue or rise outside India, only on Indian income, if you are non-resident. And please note, if you are a non-resident and you have a double taxation treaty with the country for which you are a resident, or which you are a resident, and you are non-resident of India, then according to the treaty, on certain income which you are earning in India, you have to pay tax at concessional rate. Like if you earn dividend here in India, you will not pay tax at the normal rate. You will pay tax at the rate of 10% as per the treaty. If you have a royalty income in India, you don't pay tax at the normal rate. You will have to pay tax at the treaty rate, which is 10%. If you have an interest income in India, you will have to pay tax at the concessional rate. If you are a non-resident of this country, resident of a country with which we have a treaty, after treaty we get certain benefit. But wait. Now, please note, you are a non-resident or resident, but it is quite possible that you are resident of this India. Resident includes not ordinary resident. Please note, resident includes not ordinary. And they have said this deemed resident will be considered as not ordinary resident. Wait. Earlier section 6.6 used to say a resident of India will be called not ordinary resident if he was non-resident for 9 out of 10 previous year immediately preceding the relevant previous year, or he was not in India for not more than 729 days in the 7 preceding previous year, immediately preceding the previous year. Then he was considered as not ordinary resident. Now what they have said, even this person who is deemed resident shall be considered as not ordinary resident. Even a person who is deemed resident under section 6(1)(a), which is recently introduced, he will always be called not ordinary resident if he is not here for 182 days. Not ordinary resident. So if you are not ordinary resident, don't worry. Now resident can be ordinary, not. But wait here. You are a resident of Dubai. You are a resident of Kuwait. You are a resident of other country. But you are also now deemed resident of India because of the new provision. So you are resident of 2 countries. Resident of that country and not ordinary resident of India. Now when you have a treaty with the foreign country, in a treaty it is written that if you are a resident of both the countries, if you are a resident of one country, no problem. If you are a resident of both the countries, then you have to apply tiebreaker rule to find out of which country you are resident. What is this tiebreaker rule? You are also young persons here. You also know that we play cricket match, and this 2020 match, there is a tiebreaker rule. Remember, recently when our team went, now you can call seriously about last year, when our team went to New Zealand, 2 matches of T20 were tied. Then we had to apply tiebreaker rule. What is the tiebreaker rule in 2020? That you have to play a super over, and whichever is the team scores the maximum in the super over, that will be declared as winner. The second team will be declared as loser. Both cannot be declared as winner. Tiebreaker rule. And suppose in the super over, the same number of runs are scored by both the team. Then you play again tiebreaker. Again there is a tie, and you play a tiebreaker. You play another super over. You keep on playing a super over till you become the winner. Similarly, we have a tiebreaker rule in residential status also if there is a treaty. Now there is a treaty with UAE, United Arab, or Dubai, let's say. There is a treaty. Now you are a resident of Dubai. You are also a resident of India, let's say deemed resident. Don't worry. You will have to decide. This is a tiebreaker rule. You will have to apply the tiebreaker rule to find out of which country you are a resident. You will become resident of one country. You will automatically become non-resident of another country. Even if you are not only resident, non-resident. And the tiebreaker rule says that we will apply the tiebreaker rule number 1 where you have permanent home. If you have a permanent home in Dubai, you will be called a resident of Dubai. And if you have a permanent home in India, you will be called resident of India. Resident of India. But it is quite possible that you have permanent home both in Dubai and also in India. Then again there is a tie. Then we apply the second tiebreaker rule. According to the second tiebreaker rule, we have to apply where you have vested interest. Where is your economic interest? Where is your personal interest? Mostly the people are abroad. They have economic interest in Dubai. So they will win, and they will become resident of Dubai and non-resident of India. Even if it is not possible to decide the vested interest or economic interest, or you also have permanent home in both the country, then we switch over to the third tiebreaker rule where you have a habitual abode. If your habitual abode is in UAE or habitual abode is in Kuwait, then you will become the resident of Dubai or Kuwait, and you will become the non-resident of India. And the moment you become the non-resident of India, even if you are deemed resident, how does it matter? You don't have to pay tax any of the foreign country. You only will have to pay tax on Indian income. And that too, certain Indian income will be taxable at concessional rate due to the treaty agreement. So therefore, there is nothing much. But let me tell you, all of those who have migrated to this foreign country but retaining the Indian passport, they are citizen of India, even if they don't come to India for one day, if they are not paying tax in a foreign country, but their total income in India, including 2 foreign sources income, exceeds 15 lakh, so in that case, they will become deemed resident. And once they become deemed resident, you will have to apply tiebreaker rule. Otherwise, your income will be called resident, but not ordinary resident, and you will have to pay tax on Indian income from those 2 foreign sources. This is what is deemed. Let us come to the deemed income part also, very important. Now, what is deemed income? The income is not in the nature, it is not a nature of income, but law is treating it as income. It is not an income at all, but still it is treated as an income. Let us start the first one. Section 2, clause 22, subclause E. You know what is section 2, clause 22, subclause E? Where any payment is made by a closely held company or a company in which public are not substantially interested of any sum by way of advance or loan to a shareholder who has substantial interest in the company, to a shareholder who has substantial interest in the country. Substantial interest, that means 10% voting power in that company, that such advance or loan shall be treated as deemed dividend in the hands of the shareholder. There is one part. There are 3 parts. I'm taking one part. What is this? Any advance or loan is given by a company in which public are not substantially interested. You have given a payment by way of advance or loan. To whom? To a shareholder who holds 10% voting power. Substantial interest means 10% voting power in the company. Then that advance or loan is treated as deemed dividend in the hands of the shareholder. Although it is advance, although it is a loan, it is in the nature of advance or loan, but still you are saying it is deemed dividend in your hand, and you will have to pay tax under section 2 clause 22E, read with 115O at the normal rate of tax, slab rate. So my idea is that a private limited company or a closely held company gives advance or loan, it is deemed dividend how much? To the extent of the accumulated profit. It's a deemed dividend to the extent of the accumulated profit. Accumulated profit is exclusive of capitalized profit. If the profit have been capitalized into share, no problem. But if it is reserves and surplus, please note, accumulated profit to the extent, suppose a company has accumulated profit of 20 lakh, then if any advance or loan is given up to rupees 20 lakh, it will be deemed dividend. And once it is deemed dividend, it will be taxable in the hands of that shareholder who holds 10% voting power. This is the first case. Second case, advance or loan is not given to the shareholder who holds 10% voting power. Advance or loan is given to a firm or to a company or to any other AOP in which such shareholder is either a partner or a member and has substantial interest in that company or in that partnership firm. Let me explain to you. Let me see. The advance or loan is not given to the shareholder who holds 10% voting power. Advance is given to a partnership firm, to an AOP, to a company in which such a partner, such a shareholder, what do you mean by such shareholder? One who holds 10% voting power. This shareholder holds 20% voting power in that firm, that is to share, or 20% voting power in that company or in that AOP, that in that case, that amount which is given will be taken as deemed dividend in the hands of the registered shareholder. And the third case is advance or loan is given to a person, to any other person, but for the benefit of a person who has substantial interest in the shareholding of the company. Instead of giving advance or loan to the shareholder, you give advance loan to some person that please take this advance and give it to the shareholder. This is for the benefit of the person referred to there, that will also be treated as deemed dividend. So please note, if there are accumulated profit, you have given any advance or loan, let's say accumulated profits are 20 lakh. You have given advance loan to one person who holds 10% voting power, 15 lakh. And he holds only 12% voting power. So you have given 15 lakh. Let me tell you, entire 15 lakh will be deemed dividend in the hands of that shareholder. Although he is holding only 12% voting power, no question, 15 lakh up to 20 lakh, it is deemed dividend. So 15 lakh will be deemed, even if we return that money next day. Once the loan or advance is given, if he returns the money next day, does not make any difference. The money has been given on interest, does not make any difference. Only one exception is there. If that person, if that company is in money lending business, and it is in the business of money lending, substantial part of the business is money lending, then only it is not covered. Otherwise, advance or loan given whether for interest or without interest, it is given, returned the next day, no question, it will be deemed dividend. But wait, you have given advance loan to A, who holds 12% voting power, 50 lakh is deemed dividend. Now you have given advance loan to B, who also hold 15% voting power, and he has taken 9 lakh. But please, 9 lakh will not be deemed dividend, because out of 20, 50 lakh you have already treated as deemed dividend. So only 5 lakh will be deemed dividend. So maximum deemed dividend for taking one shareholder or more than one shareholder, aggregate amount shall be to the extent of accumulated profit. But if you are given number 1 A, then deemed dividend in the hands of the A, the balance deemed dividend in the hands of the B. Even if the money is refunded, doesn't make any difference. But let me tell you, deemed dividend will be to the extent of the accumulated profit, and you will have to pay income tax on that amount. 10% voting power in the company. An advance or loan is given to you. But if it is a business advance, that is a different thing. Otherwise, advance or loan given, even if for any other purpose, they will cover it. But it should be in sum of money. Advance or loan should be sum of money, not any other asset, sum of money. So that 222E is covered. You will be having some questions. I'll answer that question later. Now, next point. Section 2, clause 24 gives you the definition of income. There are certain income which are included. Capital receipt is also income, but that is deemed income, but doesn't matter. I'm not talking about capital receipt. Capital gain is also capital receipt. I'm not talking about that. That everybody knows is an income. First income I'm taking is section 2, clause 24, subclause 10. You have deducted provident fund from the salary of the employee. You have deducted ESI from the salary of the employee. You have deducted superannuation fund contribution from the salary of the employee. This is the amount you have deducted, which you are supposed to deposit under the before the due date under respective act. But what is the law saying? Law saying 22-24-10 read with section 56(2) that such amount which you have deducted shall first be treated as your income. This will be treated as your income. This is not your income. You have deducted the sum from the salary of the employee as provident fund contribution, which you are supposed to deposit with the provident fund organization. You have deducted ESI. You have deducted superannuation fund. They said no, first treat it as income. But if you are able to deposit that money before the due date under respective act, section 36 subsection 1BA, if you deposit before the due date, then you will be allowed deduction. If you don't deposit before the due date, it has already been treated as your income. I'm really surprised. This is not my money. This is just money which I'm supposed to deposit. If I deposit that, why should I not be allowed deduction? But they have said deduction will be allowed only when you deposit that money before the due date under respective act. Yes, there are certain decisions of High Court where they have said you can deposit before the due date under 139(1). But many decisions are there where they say you have to deposit by 36(1)BA before the due date of under respective act. Because under Provident Fund Act, you have to deposit within 50 days from the end of the month in which it is deducted. In ESI, it is deposited by 21 days. If you deposit even one day late, no deduction will be allowed to you and the entire amount will be treated as your income. Although you have deposited that money, still it is deemed income. I can't help it, but this is the law of section 2, clause 2410, read with section 56 subsection 2. It is deemed income. Next point, a new law which has come. I'm really surprised. You know, earlier the law was conversion of capital asset into stock in trade is a transfer. Section 45(2). Conversion of a capital asset into stock in trade is a transfer. But we used to say the capital gain does not arise in the year of transfer. The capital gain in this case will arise in the previous year in which converted asset is sold. At that time, there will be two gains. One will be called capital gain, fair market value minus index cost, and second will be called business income, that is sale price minus fair market value. 45(2) everyone knows. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about section 2, clause 24, subclause 12A, read with the section 28, subclause VIA. Try to understand what kind of a law they have made. Conversion of any inventory or treatment of inventory as capital asset, the fair market value of that inventory shall be treated as deemed income taxable under section 28 subsection VIA. I will explain. Suppose you are buying and selling shares, and you have share as your stock in trade. You have share as your stock in trade. Now you want to convert this share into capital asset. Do it. But let me tell you, the market value of the share on the date of conversion of inventory into capital asset shall be treated as your business income under section 28 subsection VIA, clause VIA. But there I have no problem. I have a problem. Suppose you are a builder. You have a house properties as stock in trade. House property as stock in trade. You have constructed a building of, let's say, 10 floor. And there is a stock in trade. You want to sell the flats of each floor. Now what has happened is, you now decide that let me treat one floor of this building or the entire building as my office. I have converted the stock in trade into a capital asset. I have not converted, I have treated. Because earlier it was stock in trade, I have taken it above and treated as a capital asset, as my office. The law says the fair market value of that inventory on the date of conversion or treatment as capital asset will be taxable as business income under section 28 subclause VIA. Suppose I have one floor whose cost of construction with land is, let's say, 2 crore. It is lying in my stock. But suppose I want to use it as capital asset. I have not done anything. Earlier I was taking a trade. I'm not selling to anyone. I'm putting it as an investment as my capital asset. Just a transfer entry, not even a transfer in a balance sheet from below current asset, you have taken it to the fixed asset. Law says you will have to pay income tax. Just conversion or treatment. On what? Fair market value. What is fair market value? Stamp duty value. Suppose of that inventory, the stamp duty value is 3 crore. The entire 3 crore will be your business income. Although you will be allowed depreciation on that 3 crore, but it will be your business income. Somebody asked me, sir, well, what about that inventory cost? Let me tell you, if that inventory has been taken into the asset, then the closing inventory will go down. And the moment closing inventory will go down, automatically profit and loss will be adjusted. Automatically profit and loss will be less because closing stock is credited. And if the one inventory has been removed from there, automatically profit will come down. But at the same time, the fair market value of that floor will be taxable in your hand as business income, as deemed business income, although you have not sold that. Although you are going to use for your self-use, still it is going to be taxed. Yes, you will be allowed depreciation on that fair market value in future, but very hardship. Because now you are using your own place and you are paying tax today without even selling that property. If you sell that property and you get a profit, that is a different thing. You have not sold it, making it is treated as your business income. This is really very surprising, but we can't help it. Another deemed income, section 2, clause 24, subclause 16. You receive an advance or any advance in the course of negotiation for transfer of any capital asset. You know, whenever you buy any capital asset, let's say land, building, or any other capital asset, sometimes you give advance for the purchase. For negotiation of transfer of asset, you have given an advance. And if that advance is later on forfeited, and this negotiation does not result into transfer, then if that advance which is forfeited by you will be treated as deemed income under section 56, subsection 2, clause 9. Section 2, clause 24, subclause 16, read with section 56, subsection 2, clause 9. The moment you have forfeited that advance, earlier it was a different thing. Earlier it was reduced under section 51 from the cost of the asset. Now, if that advance is forfeited, advance received during the course, received or receivable in the course of negotiation of transfer of an asset, but that advance has been forfeited and the negotiation does not result into transfer of that capital asset, then the entire amount which you have forfeited will become taxable under the head income from other sources, section 56 subsection 2 clause IX. And this is read with section 2 clause 24 clause VI, 10 VI 16. So this is the another problem which we are facing day in, day out. Then section 224 16A XBIIA. What is this? Explain. No, 70. Let me explain. If you issue share, you are a company in which public are not interested, substantially interested. You issue share. And if the amount of the issue price exceeds the fair market value of that share, then the difference between the fair market value, the difference between the issue price and the difference between the issue price and the fair market value will become taxable in the hands of the company under section 56 subsection 2 clause 7B. Let us say a company issue shares at 250 rupees per share, but the fair market value of the share is only 150 rupees. Fair market value to be calculated as per section 11 UA subsection 2. Rules UA subsection 2. Rule UA fair market value has to be determined. And if you receive more than the fair market value, because you receive more premium, share value is only 10 rupees. You receive 250 rupees, 240 rupees as the premium, but the fair market value is only 150, then 100 rupees difference. Fair issue price minus fair market value. 100 rupees will be treated as deemed income of the company who has issued those shares. What a concept of deemed income under section 56 subsection 2 clause 7B. This is your deemed income. Next deemed income is section 56 subsection 2 clause 10, where you receive a sum of money exceeding 50,000 without consideration. I will not say this is deemed. When you get a immovable property by way of gift, then if the value of that property exceeds 50,000, that the stamp duty value of that property shall be deemed to be your income, taxable under the income from other sources. Again, when you buy a property for inadequate consideration, when you buy a property for inadequate consideration and the difference between the stamp duty value and the purchase price exceeds 50,000 or 10% of the actual consideration, then in that case, the difference between the stamp duty value and the price which you have paid shall be deemed to be your income, taxable under section 56 subsection 2 clause 10. Similarly, if you buy any movable asset, and difference between the fair market value and the value at which is acquired exceeds rupees 50,000, then this entire amount, difference amount, will be treated as deemed income under section 56 subsection 2 clause 10. Similarly, you have a deemed income like under 43CA, 50C, 210, I have done it. Law 43A. What it is 43CA, where the consideration accruing from the transfer of a capital asset being land or building or both forming part of stock in trade. Forming part of stock in trade. There is a consideration accruing from the transfer of any capital asset being land or building forming part of your stock in trade. And if the consideration price is less than the stamp duty value determined, adopted, assessable by the stamp duty authority, then if the difference between, then for the purpose of computing a business income, the consideration price shall be taken as the stamp duty value. the stamp duty value. If you sell any land and building forming part of stock in trade for 2 crore, but the stamp duty value is 2.50 crore, then the difference between the stamp duty value, that is 50 crore, will be treated as the business income taxable as per section 43 subsection CA. However, as per the proviso, you are allowed maximum 10% difference. Maximum 10%. Earlier it was 5%. Now it is 10% difference. What is the 10%? If the stamp duty value does not exceed the actual consideration plus 10% thereof, then in that case, you can take actual consideration. But if the stamp duty value exceeds the actual consideration plus 10% thereof, then in that case, the whole stamp duty value will be treated as the consideration price. I give you an example. You say the actual consideration is 2 crore. Add 10%, 2.20 crore. What is your stamp duty value? If your stamp duty value is 210, no problem. You can take it as 2 crore your actual consideration as the consideration price. If the stamp duty value is 2 crore 18 lakh, no problem. But if the stamp duty value is more than 220, that means stamp duty value is more than actual plus 10%. Then in that case, stamp duty value will be taken as the consideration price for the purpose of that stock in trade which has been transferred. Similar is the provision under 50C, where any capital asset with the consideration accruing from the transfer of any capital asset, being land or building, is less than the stamp duty value determined by the stamp duty value authority, then for the purpose of computing capital gain, the consideration price for purpose of section 48 shall be treated as the deemed consideration price shall be taken as the stamp duty value. Already here also maximum margin allowed is 10%. Here also there is one more point, 50C2. If you think the stamp duty value is more, you can always ask the assessing officer to refer the case to the department valuation officer. And if the valuation officer determine the value less than the stamp duty value, then that will be deemed consideration. Otherwise, the stamp duty value is taken as the deemed consideration. Remember 50C? This is 50C. 50C, 210, I have already explained to you. Similar is the provision of 50CA. What is 50CA, the new provision? Where the consideration price accruing from the transfer of any share of a company in which public are not substantially interested is less than the fair market value of that share, is less than the stamp duty, fair market value of that share, then for the purpose of computing capital gain, the consideration price shall be taken to be fair market value of that share. That means if a closely held company, if you transfer the share of a closely held company, and if you transfer that share at a price less than the fair market value determined as per provisions of rules 11UA1, if it is fair market value determined in that manner, if the transfer price is less than the fair market value, then for the purpose of computing capital gain, the fair market value shall be deemed to be the consideration price, and that will be treated as your income. Similar is the provision 44DA. What is this 44DA, presumptive income? What does it say? You think it is in your interest. Presumptive income is not in your interest. It is in the interest of income tax department. What is it saying? Notwithstanding anything contained under section 28 to 43C. Notwithstanding anything contained under 28 to 43C. If the assessee, if an eligible assessee is carrying on eligible business, and if his total turnover does not exceed 2 crore, then he can presume his income to be 8%. And then that income shall be deemed to be the profit or gain from business or profession. 8% shall be deemed to be the income or profit or gain from business or profession, or such higher which he may presume. Meaning thereby that you have to show minimum 8% as your income from business and profession. 8. And if you have a digital, for digital money received, account pay check, account pay draft, 6%. So you have to presume your income to be 8%. It is deemed income. If your income is even less than 8, you have to show 8. The income is 0, you have to show 8. Income is 4%, you have to show 8. Your income is 6%, you have to show 8. If your income is more than 8, you have to show more than 8. So it is deemed one. Even if you have a loss, you have to show 8%. If you don't want to show that, then you have an alternative. You prepare books of accounts and get your accounts audited if your total income exceeds the maximum amount which is chargeable to tax. So in the case of individual or HUF or a partnership firm other than LLP, if they are carrying on a business and if their total turnover does not exceed 2 crore, they have to presume their income. 8% will be treated as business income. It's a deemed income, 8%. If you show less than 8%, you will have to prepare a books of accounts and get your accounts audited. Or 6% in case you are a digital payment receipt. So this is also deemed profit or gain. Because even if you have 7%, you 8. You have 4%, you have to show 8%. You have not earned, still 8%. If you want to follow 44AD, otherwise prepare accounts and get your accounts audited. So this deemed. Similarly, 44ADA, if you are carrying on a profession, notwithstanding anything contained under 28 to 43C. If a person is carrying on a profession covered under 44AA, he has to presume his income to be 50% of the gross receipt. 50% of the gross receipt has to be shown as professional income. If you want to show less than 50%, then you will have to prepare books of accounts. You will have to pay. It is mandatory, not voluntary, please. Section 44AD is mandatory. You will have to follow it or a 50%. If you don't want to do that, then you will have to prepare accounts and get the accounts audited. If it is less than 8, but more than the income chargeable to tax. If it is less than 8, you have to show your professional income. Less than 50, you have to show that income 50. And if it is more than 50, you have to show more than 50. So this is also deemed chargeable to tax under 44ADA. Similarly, deemed chargeable to tax under 44AE. In case of a transporter who does not own more than 10 goods vehicle, he has to assume his profit to be one. If there is a heavy goods vehicle of more than 12,000 kilogram, more than 12 metric ton, he has to presume his income to be 1,000 per metric ton. Per metric ton multiplied by the capacity. And if in any other case, if it is not exceeding 12 metric ton, then you have to presume your income to be 7,500 per truck, provided you don't own more than 10 trucks. This is also deemed business income. If you don't do that, you have to prepare your accounts and get your account. But what I'm trying to explain, this is presumptive income is also deemed income. Let us, I'm not taking the case, I'll take that case last of time, 68 to 69D, I'll take last. But let me come to very interesting situation. 54F, let me come to you. What is 54S? If there is a long-term capital gain from the transfer of any capital asset other than residential house property, then the entire capital gain will be exempt if the entire consideration price, the consideration price so invested, proportionate to the consideration price so invested in the purchase of a residential house property shall be exempt under 54F. What is this? If there is an individual or HUF, he transfer any long-term capital asset, that means there is a long-term capital gain other than residential house property. And if he invests the entire consideration price, the whole long-term capital gain will be exempt, but consideration price has to be invested in the purchase of a residential house property, one residential house property. Or if you don't want to invest the entire consideration price, then the proportionate capital gain shall be exempt. That is, long-term capital gain multiplied by amount invested divided by the net consideration price, it will be exempt. But there are conditions. Condition number 1 is you should not own more than one house property on the date of transfer. No problem. It's not a deemed case. You should not transfer the new house property within a period of 3 years from the date of its purchase or construction. No problem. But there is another problem, that you should not purchase another residential house property within a period of 2 years, or construct another residential house property within a period of 3 years. Sir, I have not sold my asset. I have purchased a residential property, one. Now I have not sold it, but I have purchased another residential house property within 2 years. I have constructed another residential house property within 3 years. What will happen? The capital gain which was exempt to me under 54F earlier will be deemed to be my capital gain of the previous year in which I have purchased the second property or I have constructed the second property. I have not sold anything. What I have done, I have only purchased one more as a residential house, or I have constructed one more after that. What are they saying? That capital gain which was exempt under 54F earlier will become taxable in the previous year in which second house is purchased, that is within 2 years, or constructed within 3 years. So this is also a very strange thing. Similar strange thing is 54EC. What is 54EC? If you transfer any long-term, and you are in a long-term capital gain from the transfer of a capital asset being land or building. Earlier it was any capital asset, now land and building. And if you invest that capital gain in the bonds of National Highway Authority or Rural Electrification Corporation, etc., I say bond, then you will be allowed an exemption to the extent of 50 lakh. Remember, 50 lakh, 54 EC available to everybody. Lock-in period of that is 5 years. I'm not saying that deemed. Now, the deemed point is that you cannot take any loan against this bonds. And if you take a loan against this bond, then whatever capital gain was exempt to you under 54 EC shall become taxable. I have not sold the trust. I have not sold the bonds. I have taken a loan against the security of that bond. This is given in explanation under section 54 EC subsection 2. Explanation is there that you cannot take any loan against these bonds, which is lock-in period is 5 years. Earlier it was 3 years. If you take any loan, then please note capital gain which was exempt will become taxable in the previous year in which the loan is taken. This is also a very strange thing which I am telling. Now, the most important deemed income, which I have kept myself with me, and that is from section 68 to section 69D. What does it say? Try to understand. Section 68. If any sum is found credited in the books of accounts maintained by the assessee. Wait. The compulsory is books of accounts is maintained by the assessee. And if there is any sum found credited, I never said income, any sum found credited, even a loan found credited, even a sale found credited, even a gift found credited. If any sum is found credited in your books of accounts maintained by the assessee, for which the assessee does not offer any explanation of the nature and source of this sum, or offers an explanation which the opinion of the AO is not satisfactory, then such sum which is found credited in the books of account in the previous year shall be deemed to be income of the previous year in which it is found credited in the books of accounts of the assessee. Are you noticing my point? Deemed income, that may be not an income at all, that may be a loan, that may be a share capital. But if that loan is found credited in the books of account, if that share capital is found credited in the books of account, if that gift is found credited in the books of accounts maintained by you, give me the source of that gift, give me the source of that loan, give me the nature of that gift. And then if you do not give that, or you give the source which is not found satisfactory, then that amount of gift, that amount of loan, that amount of credit found in your books of account shall be deemed to be the income of the previous year in which it found credited. Meaning thereby you have to give the name of the creditor, the person was given, the capacity of creditor to pay that, and the genuineness of the transaction. People say, I have received a gift and I'm paying tax on gift under section 56(2)(10). So where is the problem? If I pay tax on gift, so where is the need to give the source of that? Because it is a gift credited in my account. I'm not taken from relative. That's why I'm paying tax on that. Why are you taxing it? Man, you have to give the nature and source. And if you don't give the nature and source, and if it is found it is not genuine, whether it was exempt or it is taxable, does not make any difference, because section 115 BBE will tax you at 78%, 60% tax, 25% surcharge, and 4% education cess. What does section 115 BBE says? Wait. Where the total income of an assessee includes an income referred to in section 68, 69, 69A, 69B, 69C, 69D, and such income is reflected in your return of income. You have shown it is your income, and such income is reflected in your return of income. Still, you are liable to pay tax at the rate of 78%. And if it is not reflected in your return of income, it is determined by the AO. Still, you have to pay tax at the rate of 78%. But if it is determined by the AO, you also have to pay penalty under section 271 AAC, 10% or 60%, 6%. So if you have received a gift, and if that gift is not genuine, in our country, gift is not given, gift is taken. You all know that. Gift is taken. Nobody wants to give gift to anybody. But if you receive a gift, that gift should be genuine. And if it is found credited in your books of account, please, sometimes book is not credited, you don't maintain books of account, then 68 will not be applicable. 69, 69A may be applicable. But if you are maintaining books of account, 68 is applicable. You will have to give us the nature or source of that gift. You will have to give the capacity of that person to give that gift and the genuineness of the transaction. All the three will be proved. Then the onus will be the AO to prove it is not genuine. But there is a proviso also under 68 that if it is a share capital or share premium or any share application received by the company, closely held company, it is received by a closely held company, and this will not be treated as the explanation unless you will have to give the source of the source. It's not that you have to give the source who has given that capital. You will have to give from where that he received the source of source will have to be proved that you have received the capital from A. You said this is the A's capital account, this is the A's statement of account. No, you will have to also give the source of the source. How did he earn that money? A earned that money. You have to give that. Otherwise, it will be treated as income of the company. Income of the company. If a company receives share application money, share premium, or share capital, company has to take the source of the source. Such has to explain to the AO what is the source. Sources A, B, C, D, shareholder. What is the source of A? What is the source of B? That will also have to be given. Then only it will be treated as genuine transaction. Otherwise, 68 will be applicable and company will have to pay tax on that income. Deemed it. Now, similarly, there is 69 that if any financial year relevant to the investment year, any investment has been maintained, an investment has been made by you, which is not recorded in the books of accounts, if any maintained. If maintained, again, if not maintained, but there is an investment made by you in any financial year relevant to the investment year, and you don't give the nature or source of that investment, or you give the source of that investment, but you are not able, but it is not found satisfactory by the AO, then such amount which you have invested shall be deemed to be the income of the previous year in which it is found invested. This is section 69, investment not disclosed. Investment, unexplained investment is called unexplained investment. So sometimes you may not maintaining accounts, but you received a gift. You are not maintaining account. 68 will not be applicable. But when you have received gift, you must have invested that money somewhere. When you are making an investment, they'll say, what is the source? You will say, source is the gift. They will say, give the nature and source of gift. Prove that gift is genuine. Give the nature. Then only it will be turned. So 69 will be applicable. You have purchased a car. You have purchased a building. You have purchased an asset. They'll say, give me the source of that asset. You may maintain books of account, you may not. If you are maintaining, it is not recorded. If you are not maintaining, you are not able to give the source. Then unexplained investment covered under 69. Again, 115 BB is applicable. Then 69A. What is 69A? I have told you 69. 69A. When any sum of money is found, sum of money or bullion or jewelry is found in the possession of the SSC, and SSC does not give any offer and explanation of the source of that money, source of that money, bullion, jewelry, or a valuable article or thing, or he gives an explanation which is not found to be satisfactory, then such sum of money or value of such asset shall be deemed to be the income of the previous year in which it is found in your possession. Search case or survey case, the money is found in your possession. Some bullion, jewelry, valuable article thing is found. The AO is asking, the person is asking the nature and source of that money, bullion, jewelry. You don't give the nature and source, or if you give the explanation not found satisfactory, then such money which is found from you or such valuable article or thing found, the value of that shall be deemed to be your income, and you will liable to pay tax at the rate of 78%. This is what is called sum of money or bullion, jewelry. Then 69B. 69B says investment not fully disclosed. If you have constructed a building and they are asking for the source of that building, what is how much amount you have invested in your books of account, you have recorded that the amount invested is 2 crore. They say, no, give me the proof that you have invested only 2 crore. It appears that it is 3 crore because the cost of construction multiplied by certain floor area occupied should be more. Explain to him that it is not undervalued. So therefore, 69B can be made applicable to you. Give the nature and source. It is recorded at less rate. 69B, investment not fully disclosed your books of accounts. 69C, unexplained expenditure. You have incurred an expenditure, but you don't give the nature and source of that income for which that how you have incurred that expenditure from that, whatever the source of that expenditure. You have done the marriage of the child. Where is the source of that? You have spent 50 lakh. Give me the source of that income. Unexplained expenditure. Or you may be, you have recorded in your books of accounts some bogus expense. Give us the proof of that expense. Unexplained expenditure. Then that also will be treated as your deemed income. 69C. 69D is a hundi. You take a loan against hundi. It should be by account pay check or account pay draft or electronic clearing system. Otherwise, it will be deemed to be your income. So this is also very important. And here 115 BB shall be applicable. So that point should also be kept in mind. And then other deemed income, I may tell you, is deemed let out. If you have more than 2 house property meant for your self-occupation, more than 2 house property, and you do not let it out, it is treated as deemed to be let out, and you will have to take the annual value of that property. You will have to take the annual value of the property as your income. That also is under section 23, subsection 4. Let me tell you, that should also be kept in mind. Another point, last point I would like to say, 115 QA, if you buy back the share, then the difference between the buyback price and the issue price shall be deemed to be the income, shall be deemed to be chargeable to income tax in the hands of the company. You have to pay tax. You are buying and still you pay tax because you have paid more money than what is covered under distributable income. If you pay more money, if you buy at a more money, then it will be not an income of the person receiving. It is the income of person, the company who has bought back those shares. And they will have to pay the tax at the rate of 20% plus surcharge plus education cess. The company pays on buyback of share under 115 QA. So I have given you many deemed income. There are many others also, but most important, I've told you. Now you have queries. You can ask the queries because it's already 1.5 hour, almost practically 120 minutes, and you will be having many queries. So you are most welcome to ask queries. If at all you want any other section to be explained, I'll explain that section also. Otherwise, I've completed most of the sections which are relevant for you. Now, your queries, please. Yes, please.
Sir, there are a lot of queries are in the chat box.
I can't hear you. Let me put the earphone. Let me put the earphone because I'm not able to hear you. Wait a minute, please. Earplug, let me put it.
Okay.
Now, please come out.
So one question in the chat box is that if section 224 clause subclause 10 employee contribution to PF ESC is paid after due date, it is deemed to be treated as income. Whether the
No,
same is
it is already treated as income. If you pay, then deduction is allowed under 36. Please, it is already treated as income. But if you pay that, it is allowed as deduction. If you don't pay that, it is already income. We are not showing it as a different thing. In income tax, it is treated as income. It is treated as income. Deduction is allowed under 36(1)(VA) if you pay before the due date under respective act. But certain High Court said due date under 139(1). That's the only difference. But it is already treated as income under section 2 clause 24 subclause 10. But if you claim deduction, you will be given, otherwise not.
So he is asking whether the same is treated as payment under section 43B, sometimes heard allowed as per some High Court ruling. Is it correct?
I have said that there are 10 High Courts which have given decision in your favor that it is allowed till the due date of return under 139(1). Like employer contribution, you can take under due date of return. But Karnataka High Court, where CPC is sitting, there they have said no, it is due date. There is another High Court which has also said, Chennai High Court, and now Delhi High Court, Delhi Supreme Court, another High Court, Delhi also have said that. Earlier Delhi High Court Emil case, they had said no, it is due date under 139(1). But now Bharat Hotel case, one High Court, Delhi High Court has said no, due date under 36(1)(BA). Karnataka High Court said due date under 36(1)(VA). So what is happening is CPC is in Karnataka. So whatever return you file, if you don't deposit up to the due date under respective act, what do they do? They disallow it because they say we are bound by the Karnataka High Court decision because we are under the jurisdiction of Karnataka High Court. We cannot change it. Yes, your High Court, if given opinion in your favor, you can always go and claim through the AO. But CPC will never allow. CPC says we are bound by Karnataka High Court decision. Our jurisdiction is Bangalore and Bangalore is in Karnataka. So we cannot give you any deduction of this Provident Fund, ESI or Superannuation Fund unless and until you deposit that amount before the due date under respective act. That is Provident Fund Act 15th, the ESI Act 21. Correct?
Okay. So another question from Mr. Srijit is that, can you please explain the TDS implication of advance given by a private company to its shareholder having more than 10% share under new provision of income tax?
Point is, when under the new provisions of Income Tax Act, Section 222 is covered, whether it is A, B, C, D, E. Now TDS has to be deducted. Any advance or loan given by a prosely held company, there will be obligation of that company to deduct TDS if the amount paid exceeds rupees 5,000. That is the law. You have to deduct the TDS because 222A is different, where it is asset distributed in kind. The 222B is different when you are given debentures or share. 222C is different, liquidation or reduction of capital. 222E is deemed dividend. Now Now everything is taxable in the hands of the shareholder. Whether it is actual dividend or deemed dividend, taxable in the hands of the shareholder. But the advance loan you give, TDS will have to be deducted under 194.
Right, sir, right. So another question is, will the value of the property received by a private trust created for maintenance of minor child becomes taxable? Will the provisions of section 50C applicable to sale of immovable property located outside India? Two parties does.
My point is, stamp duty value is outside India or in India only? Stamp duty value is only in India. Why are you talking about outside India sold? It's only in India. The stamp duty value, the authority determined by E is only in India. Outside India, we don't take that amount.
So the property
Sold by resident or non-resident in India is covered.
Okay.
Because if it is outside India, the income which accrue or rise outside India will be taxable only when you are a resident in India. Otherwise, it's not taxable. And it is already taxed in that country. So you get a double taxation relief.
Okay, sir. Sir, the first part of the question is, will the value of the property received by a private trust created for maintenance of minor child become taxable?
Now, section 56(2)(10) says, first understand, then please. If a trust, if you give anything to a charitable trust, or if a charitable receive anything or pays anything, it should be to a registered one. If it is not registered, if you are giving anything to the private trust, it is fully taxable under the income from other source. But wait, if it is a trust created by an individual for the benefit of his relative, then it is not covered under 56(2)(10). So if I give my asset to a private trust for the benefit of my relative, then in that case, absolutely that private trust receives the corpus, it is not taxable. But if there is a private trust which is not for the benefit of the relative of that individual, it is any other private trust, the entire amount received by the private trust, whether in money or in kind, will be fully taxable in the hands of the trust under section 56, subsection 2, clause 10. So if it is minor child and minor child is the relative of that person, where is the problem? Relative. If not relative, then no.
Fine. So another question is that, will audit be compulsory for transporter owing more than 10 trucks? That is.
No, not necessary. It is only for, sorry, man, it is only for 44AD and 44ADA. 44AE is not mentioned. I'm sorry, it is not mentioned there.
Sir, another question is, can you elaborate more about transportation of heavy vehicle ton-based valuation?
Sir, ton-based valuation is given in the registration certificate. You have to take the registration certificate. It is gross volume. Gross volume. You have to take that registration certificate and multiply by 1,000 per metric ton.
So another question. Assessee has entered into a right to use agreement with Oyo Rooms under a revenue sharing agreement. Can 8% of the gross receipts be offered under section 44AD?
What is this agreement? 44AD is for business income. What is this agreement? I have not understood. People are even showing a option, a future and option 8%. I'm really surprised. How can they take it 8%? Because future and option, you cannot calculate 8% on that. There is only, but there are people who are, because it is not written there. But I have not seen the which you are talking about. What did you say? Revenue sharing? What's revenue sharing? You are calculating an eligible business. You can carry on a business other than, commission you cannot take, that is there. Or you can have professional is 44ADA. Or brokerage you cannot take. Otherwise, what is there in it? I have not understood your point.
Another question is, in case of a private limited company, if it buy back its shares at a price below the fair market value, is there any tax burden for the company?
No, not there. Not there.
Okay, sir. Okay.
It is only when you have to buy at more than the face value. Less than the face value, no problem. You buy at the more than the face value, and the difference between this fair market value and the buyback is there. There's no problem there.
Another question is sale of property if invested in house property exemption is available. Whether it is necessary to invest all of proceeds or after cost.
All of the proceed?
Or after cost. That means capital gain, I feel.
Sir, 54 it is capital gain. 54 has the consideration price. 54 is capital gain. 54B is capital gain. 54 EC is capital gain. But 54F is the consideration price.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Proportionate to the consideration price.
Right. So another question, can you elaborate the by reason of his domicile or residence or any other criteria of similar nature under section 6?
Sir, you have a residency certificate there. So by way of residence, and you are the earning income there, and you don't pay tax in that country. That is all. By way of domicile of that country, due to residence of that country, or criteria of similar nature. Sometimes people don't pay tax in any country. They keep on moving from one country to another country to the third country. They don't become resident of any other country. That is the criteria of similar nature.
Okay, sir. Okay. So another question, whether 44AD applicable for business having loss?
Business having?
Loss.
If there is a loss, you are not supposed to file, your income does not exceed maximum amount which is chargeable to tax. Then you may not get your accounts audited. But if your income exceeds maximum chargeable to tax, you have to get your prepare the accounts and get them audited. You know, when you have a loss, you will not be able to carry forward the loss unless the loss is proved. How will you carry forward the loss? That means you will maintain accounts. Otherwise, you will not be able to carry forward the loss. Go to 44AD, we don't want your accounts, then loss will not be allowed to be carried forward. How do you determine your loss?
Okay, sir. Sir, another question. In case of insurance policy which are not exempted under section 1010D, TDS
difference only. Now the law is difference only taxable.
Okay. On whether the tax can be claimed on the premium paid by, say, 5 years back.
Sir, I told you, not difference between the amount received minus the amount paid. Earlier it was not there, now they have done it because TDS will be deducted at the rate of 5% only on the difference.
Okay, sir. Okay. So another question, what is the maximum time one can hold NRE account after coming to India permanently?
It is FEMA rule. The FEMA says if you have intention to go back, you can hold it. FEMA says it is FEMA rule. If you have intention to go back, you can hold it for more than that period also, or you have to take the permission, because intention of going back is very important. So the FEMA rule says if you have intention of going back, then you can hold it for even 1 year, more than that. But if it is no intention of coming back, it will depend on that. Then you will convert it into, there is one name called non-resident. What is that? There is one name called, you have to convert into that account. I'm sorry, I will recall it, non-resident, some name is there. You have to convert into that. Rupee account, no, non-resident, some account is there. See the Google, you will get it. Rule of this.
Sir, is it non-resident ordinary account?
No. Non-resident ordinary is the rupee account. No. It is exempt account, non-resident external account. It is in currency, but the name is given differently. I don't remember at the moment offhand, but it is given differently.
FCNR, is it FCNR?
No, FCNR is only fixed deposit. There are two types of non-resident external account. One is FCNR, where you get money transferred at the same dollar, or another is in rupee, but you will convert into foreign currency and take it back.
Sir, it is RIFI account. RIFI account. Returning Indian Foreign Exchange Entitlement.
Yes,
Returning Indian Foreign Exchange Entitlement.
Some account
RIFI.
name is there. It is there.
RIFI,
if you
RIFI
see
account.
the Google,
Yeah.
it is there.
Yes, RIFI account.
So another question, as per the agreement, advance is to be forfeited by the owner if agreement is cancelled, but the owner decides to give back the money. In such case,
No problem. Then there is no forfeited. If there is a forfeiture, then only. If there is no forfeiture, then what is the problem? Sir, it is no forfeiture. What is the problem? If you retain, then only it is an income. If you don't return, you return, there is no income.
Another simple question is, here it is, whether 44 AD can be applicable for computer center training students. For computer center training students.
Why not? Why not? Even tuition center, coaching center, 44 AD is all out. Because it is not a profession. Under 44 ADA, it should be a 44 AA profession. That is legal, medical, engineering, architecture, profession of accountancy, company secretary, authorized representative, film artist, information technology. Other professions are covered under business because 44 AD says it should not be a profession covered under 44 AA. It is not covered under 44 AA, so you can go to 44 AD.
Okay. So, if the stamp duty value is more than 10% of the consideration, then the stamp duty value shall be considered as the consideration.
Correct.
Now, whether the purchaser can treat this fair market value as the deemed cost, just like in the case of
it is. Once you have paid tax under the head income from other sources, your cost will be the stamp duty value.
Fine, fine. So, any further questions? Please switch on your video and please interact. Any question? Please. Any further questions? Within 5 minutes, we will conclude the session. Sir, that deemed resident, could you please explain a little bit?
Deemed
Residents.
I told you, wait a minute. If you are in a country where you are not liable to pay any tax, okay, and your total income, Indian income, that is income received in India, deemed to be received in India, accrue arise in India, deemed to accrue in India, plus 2 more income. Income from a business outside India, but controlled from India, income from a profession outside India, set up in India. If that exceeds 15 lakh in the previous year, you will become deemed resident even if you don't come to India for 1 day. Number of days is not relevant here. Once you are a deemed resident, don't worry. You are not ordinary resident. Even if there is no treaty, you are not ordinary resident. Once you are not ordinary resident, you only pay tax on Indian income. Everybody pays tax on Indian income, plus 2 more income. Income from a business outside India, controlled from India, income from a profession outside India, set up in India. That's all. But if you have a treaty with that country, then you will apply the tiebreaker rule. Once you apply the tiebreaker rule and you become resident of that country, you will automatically become non-resident of India. And the moment you are non-resident of India, you do not have to pay tax on the foreign income. You only have to pay tax on the Indian income. And that too, certain income of India will be taxable at special rate, like dividend, not normal rate, treaty 10%, interest 10%, royalty 10%. So somewhere it is 15 also. So this is concessional rate. If you apply the treaty, and in the treaty you become resident of other country and become non-resident of this country. This is called. So deemed resident, if you have less than 50 lakh, nothing to worry. Same rule. If your total income in India, including 2 sources, foreign sources income is less than 15, you are not deemed resident. The normal provision will be applicable. But if your income is more than 15 lakh, then of course section 6.1 will not be applicable, 6.1a will be applicable, and then you will have to be called deemed not ordinary resident. But even if you are not ordinary resident, you can apply treaty, and with the treaty you can get benefit of that. And if there is no treaty, still you don't have to pay tax on foreign income, except 2 foreign income. One income which is from a business outside India, controlled from India, or a profession outside India, set up in India.
But what about gold taken by the partners at the time of resignation?
Sir, anything which is withdrawn from the firm, 45(4) is applicable if it is in kind. So at the time of dissolution or otherwise, if any asset is distributed to the partner in kind, then the fair market value of that asset will have to be calculated, and there will be a capital gain to the firm and not to the partner, to the firm.
45(4).
45(4).
Sir, practicing chartered account drawing salary from the firm, can you offer it under 44 ADA?
Sir, this is the point which you are asking, that it is a professional income He is drawing salary.
Yeah.
So will it be covered under 44 ADA? My dear, you will have to earn salary. Do you incur any expenditure in earning that salary?
Yeah.
44 ADA minimum 50. It's not maximum 50. It is minimum 50. They will say, or you will say, where is the need to maintain books of account? I will say, sir, wait a minute. There is no need to maintain books of account, but where is that money? If you have withdrawn the money, is okay. But if the money is lying in the bank account, they will catch hold of you, or they will take you in 69 investment, and that the money Mudian investment not fully disclosed or unexplained investment. So don't think that you can show 50%, enjoy 50%. No, if it is higher, you have to show higher income.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Another one, futures and option, whether that 8% declaration is possible.
Sir, dekhiye, you can show 8%, but if it is higher, you have to show higher. Tell me, you have to show higher if it is higher. And if it is less, then of course you can show 8%. Otherwise, prepare accounts and get them accounts. Where is the difficulty in future and option to get your accounts audited? It's only the difference between the what you call the price which you have paid for that. It's only that. You can keep the account. Otherwise, you can do it. But see to it, if your income is more than 8, you should show more than 8.
Okay, sir. Very good. Any further questions?
Supposing a partner is going to bring gold into the firm as purchase and sales.
45.3.
Purchase and sales.
If it is recorded at the book where recorded price, no problem. Because 40/3 allows it. But wait. 56.210 will be applicable in the hands of the partner. Because you will say, I have recorded in the price at which in the books of account. But section 56.210 says, if you receive any movable property and the difference between the fair market value and the value at which you have acquired is more than 50,000, then you will have to pay tax on that. Other income from other sources. So don't do it at the value recorded in the books of account. Partner will not be affected. Firm will be affected because it receives a movable property. It receives a movable property and the value of the movable property recorded in the books of account and fair market value, there is a difference.
If it is billed at the fair market value,
then there is no problem. But then capital gain will be taxable in the hands of the partner. 45.3.
yeah.
Partner will have to pay tax, 45.3.
So one question also in the chat box. If the land is sold by individual and invested in the house property joint ownership, whether eligible for 54 of if the entire proceeds are invested
Sir,
in the
you can buy the name of your wife jointly or in the name of your spouse or even in the name, only in the name of spouse. But if you buy in the name of your and your child, you will be allowed only to the extent it is in your name. Child name not allowed, but wife name allowed. Or you can buy 100% the name of wife, that's also allowed. There are judgment, what you call Kamal Bahal and Arora, Ravinder Arora. Two judgments are there in favor that you can buy in the name of wife, because when you buy wife in the name of spouse, otherwise there is a clubbing. Otherwise there is a clubbing under 64(2). So therefore there is no problem.
54 EC, you say that within that lock-in period, if loan is taken, it is taxable. Now, if the deposits itself is cancelled, supposing that the person who has invested is no more, within that 5 years he expires, and his children is going to take back that particular investment.
My dear, there is a lock-in period of 5 years. The circular is for something else. There is a circular that if somebody dies and he has invested the money in the capital gain scheme, he can withdraw from the capital gain scheme. It will not be taxable. But in this case, I don't think that they allow a withdrawal before 5 years. I don't think.
If it is withdrawn before 5 years, it will be taxed in the year of withdrawal or in the previous year.
The recipient will step into the shoes. It cannot be converted into money. Before 5 years, it is written there. It cannot be converted into money or it cannot be transferred within period of 5 years. Earlier it was 3 years. And then the explanation says you cannot take loan against that also. Because if you take loan, it will be treated as transfer. Read 54(2). 54 EC2 and explanation to that.
54 EC2.
54 EC subsection 2 and explanation under that also.
Okay. Sir, absolutely great 2 hours, sir. And we could not contribute nothing more than our love and affection, because this is
Thank
a
you.
COVID situation. And we are delighted, sir, really delighted. And from the bottom of my heart, I am saying that it is fulfillment of my dream. Surely it is.
Jayaprakash, don't be that humble, you know.
And
Don't worry, don't worry. Always
really,
welcome.
sir, really.
Always
Really.
welcome. Don't worry, always welcome.
Sir, after this seminar, I feel that you have elevated me as the chairman of ICI and not as the branch of Kannur, sir.
Thank you.
Because
Thank you.
I am
Don't worry,
getting
don't
that,
worry.
because I am getting that appreciation in my WhatsApp, sir. Really, thank you. Now,
Welcome,
I request,
welcome.
sir, if anything is to be discussed with the sir, please switch on, or else I am going to conclude. Senior members, Suresh sir, P. Mohan sir, anything, because this is the rare opportunity, so I could not leave, sir.
Sir, in case of for school running, whether it is trust deed based, is based or society based registration is based, sir?
Not been able to understand. What did you say?
So for running school, whether it is go through trust deed based registration, getting other 12A registration ATG, then our
Not necessarily
society
12A or
and
1023C. One of that re-registration has to be done by everyone before 31st August. It will start from 1st of October 2020 till 31st August. Every registered trust or a trust which has got approval under 1023C will have to apply in a simplified form yet to be notified. Only you have to give the name, address, PAN number and registration certificate. You will be given re-registration, re-approval, but it is mandatory to do it up to 31st December. Otherwise, you will be deregistered. Let me tell you.
Regarding this 68 and 115 VBE, you told that the penalty is mandatory, but in the case of 68,
No. Penalty is mandatory only when it is determined by the AO. If you reflect that in your return of income, then only 78%. Then you don't have to pay penalty under 271 AAC. But if it is determined, that income is determined under 68, 69, etc. by the AO, and you have not shown, then in that case, besides this, penalty will be there 10%.
many cases are there where the demonetization.
Yes, demonetization, you have not, all cases of demonetization have been done uniformly. They have already been treated as income. Don't worry, there is very scope of filing appeal for that. You are showing as a sale, and they have treated the entire sale as your income. And that sale they have not deducted from the profit also. Double the tax they have done. Whatever amount you deposited of that sale, it is treated as income. Whatever you sell have shown in the profit and loss account, you have treated as a net profit, that is also treated as income. What a case they have decided this time. Everyone has done uniformly. Whatever amount deposited, your demonetization has been treated as your income. Wait and watch.
You mean to say that there is a scope for appeal in that?
Yes, because how can they charge double? One place, the whole sale is treated as income, tax paid. At the same time, you are showing in your profit and loss account, and then you are showing net profit as income, and you are charging tax on that also. How can it be possible?
Again, penalty is also charged.
Penalty, though, I tell you, penalty is 10%.
That's it. Mandatory penalty is there, 115 PB, higher rate of tax is there, and double taxation is also there.
I know. Don't worry, you will have a scope. But you can go for Vivad Se Vishwas also if you have filed an appeal. But nobody is going. Nobody is going for this because they say, what is the advantage? Only it said 10%. That is 6%, nothing else. In other cases, one who has cheated the government, all bogus cash, bogus capital gain, bogus everything. He saved tax for, he's paying 30%, no interest, interest of 6 years gone, no penalty. He is a beneficiary. and a person like me who saved some money and during demonetization deposited that, I am putting into difficulty. This is something very surprising, but we can't help it. I have told them that please amend the Vyas Se Vishwas, give us some concession. Don't charge 78%. Give us some concession. Let's see if they agree to that. I have my doubt. They may not agree.
But your advice is that we can give, we can file appeal against those cases of 150.
Yes, the time of appeal is already there. Go over. You should have
But
filed it.
We can condemn a condemnation can also be filed. No?
Condonation may be given to you. That is a different story altogether.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir.
But that condonation not allowed for Vyas Se Vishwas.
Yeah, that is not there. Sir, one small doubt. In respect of those cases where the appeal time is not over and the appeal is filed after the cut-off date.
No problem. No problem. Still you can go for Vyas Se Vishwas. On 31st January, if the time was not over, you can go for Vyas Se Vishwas even if you have filed an appeal. You will later on withdraw the appeal. You can go. If on 31st January, the time period was not over or you have filed an appeal which is pending, in both cases you can go.
But on 31st January, that cut-off date, the 60 days is over. And we have filed the appeal for
No, for
subsequent-
condonation, no condonation. If if it is over before 31st January, you may apply for condonation, then they may give the concession, otherwise no.
They have already condoned. They have already condoned and they have taken the appeal on records.
On 31st of January, it was on record,
No,
but they have condoned it.
they have condoned it.
But it was such 60-day period over.
Period is over before 31st.
Give an affidavit, they may agree to that. Commissioner of Income Tax, give an affidavit, they may agree to that. But it is not there in FAQs.
Okay.
FAQ it is not there. FAQ it is not there.
You try that. FAQ it is not there.
Okay.
But we are going to
Okay.
come with one more FAQ very shortly. Don't worry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Now I request the immediate past chairman Saju to propose the vote of thanks. Saju, please.
Chairman of the branch, C.A. Prakash, most respected and revered speaker of today's session, Dr. C.A. Girish Ahuja sir, members of the provision. I'm extremely delighted to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Kannur branch. May I take this opportunity to thank on behalf of Kannur branch and on my personal behalf our most respected, distinguished speaker and Guru of Income Tax, Dr. C.A. Ahuja sir, for the excellent session on the topic Deeming Provision under Income Tax Act. We are really honored and privileged to listen to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I
Welcome.
would also
Stay
like to
healthy.
thank
Stay
each-
safe. Tell me,
Thank you,
sir.
thank you,
Tell me. You're coming out with something.
Tell me, sir.
Thank you,
I
sir.
would
Stay
also
safe.
like to thank all the members of the branch as well as other members who have tuned in large numbers to this webinar. All the members have always been supportive of all the endeavors of our branch. Thank you very much. And thank you all once again. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Take care.
Same to you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayaprakash. Thank you.